Ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters in humanity, imagine a nation with ancient roots, vibrant culture, and powerful potential. But somewhere along the way, it chooses pride over principle, noise over knowledge, and power over peace. What happens when such a nation is forced to confront the consequences of its own actions? What if, through pain, defeat, and reflection, it begins to rise, not just economically, but morally and spiritually? Today, we are diving deep into a story not just about borders or politics, but about transformation, from beastly behavior to human dignity. And what's even more powerful, this transformation, this awakening, aligns shockingly with what was revealed in the Quran 1400 years ago. Yes, scientific truths and social realities, all echoed in a book many have ignored, but none can deny. So stay with me. What you're about to hear is not just a political commentary. It's a journey through history, psychology, science, and divine revelation. By the end of this talk, you won't just see India differently. You'll see the Quran in a way that may shake your heart and sharpen your vision. Let's begin. Human beings are not born mature. Maturity is a process. A newborn child has no understanding of danger, responsibility, consequences, or morality. It is only when the child touches fire and gets burned, when they fall from a height, when they are reprimanded by elders for a mistake, that they begin to learn. These painful lessons become the stepping stones to wisdom. Without failure, there is no growth. Without pain, there is no reflection. The same principle that applies to individuals also applies to nations. A nation, too, behaves like a child when it has unchecked power, when it is unchallenged in its actions, or when it has never truly paid the price for its aggression. But just as a child learns from pain, so too can a nation be brought to maturity through consequences. India, as a rising power in the 21st century, has walked through various phases: colonial victimhood, post-independence confusion, internal conflicts, and regional rivalries. However, in recent years, the aggressive posturing by certain factions within its leadership, especially regarding its neighboring countries, particularly Pakistan, has revealed a dangerous trend. One of arrogance rooted in unchecked power, not maturity, whether it was military bravado or cross-bend policies driven by emotion rather than rationality. India seemed to be acting like an impulsive adolescent who had just discovered strength and wanted to flex muscles without fully understanding the consequences. When India took actions like the Balakot airstrike in 2019, what followed was not glory, but global scrutiny, economic instability, and military embarrassment when Pakistan responded swiftly and returned the captured pilot with dignity. Instead of admitting a miscalculation, the propaganda machines went into overdrive. But truth, like light, eventually finds a way through the cracks. The world began to see through the smoke. International bodies questioned the narrative. Internal voices began to rise against warmongering. At that point, the price of impulsive nationalism began to reveal itself, not just in diplomatic cost, but in economic terms, in loss of international credibility, and in the ripple effects on domestic harmony. Just as a person might ignore the advice of a parent until they themselves fall and bleed, India's trajectory shows how global correction plays the role of that painful fall. Sanctions, diplomatic isolation in certain forums, trade imbalances, pressure from international human rights bodies, all acted like the slap of reality that an immature individual needs to finally reflect. It was not sermons or suggestions that worked. It was the experience of being heard. Slowly, a shift in tone began to emerge. The aggressive war cries became softer. The chest-thumping nationalism turned toward quieter economic reforms. This is the process of becoming a human being, not biologically, but morally, intellectually, and politically. The Quran tells us in multiple verses that human beings are created in the best of forms, but they can fall to the lowest of the low if they do not use their intellect and morality. This distinction between a mature and an immature being is not physical, but spiritual and behavioral. A nation that acts on impulse, on ego, and on vengeance is no better than a wild beast. But when a nation stops, reflects, corrects itself, and begins to act with justice and wisdom, it ascends from animalistic instinct to human dignity. India's recent behavior shows signs of this transformation, not because of sudden virtue, but because of necessary correction through hardship. Scientists call this principle homeostasis, self-correcting mechanism. When a system becomes unstable, feedback is generated to restore balance. In politics and society, these feedbacks come in the form of consequences. When India took steps that led to tension with China and suffered military losses in Galwan Valley, it realized that regional stability cannot be sacrificed for political spectacle. That incident too acted like a scar that brought caution. Similarly, economic policies that led to investor loss and industrial protests also forced a rethink. The more India's leadership touched the fire of consequence, the more they began to act with restraint. In Islamic philosophy, there is a profound concept called ibtila, a test through hardship. Allah mentions that He tests nations and individuals with fear, hunger, loss of wealth and lives, so they may return to Him and reflect. The idea is not to destroy through suffering, but to awaken. Trials are not always punishments, they are opportunities to wake up. When a nation becomes arrogant, Allah allows it to taste its own medicine, just as He did with the people of Ad, Thamud, Pharaoh, and others mentioned in the Quran. This is not revenge but divine correction. When India saw its global image being questioned, when its minorities began to suffer internally, when its border security was tested, these were signs, not just political developments, but divine messages for introspection. Many Indian intellectuals have begun to realize that lasting greatness cannot be built on the bones of others. Real development is not loud but silent. Real power does not come from threatening neighbors but from healing your own house. This inner realization is what separates a child from an adult. It is what separates an animal reacting to threat from a human responding with wisdom. For years, immature nationalism was sold to the public, but the bitter fruits of this ideology have forced a national rethink. Now, India is talking more about trade than strikes, more about diplomacy than war. This is a sign that the nation is stepping into maturity. Not perfectly, not completely, but directionally. We must also understand that maturity is not the absence of power, but the control of it. An immature person cannot handle a gun without hurting someone, but a mature adult knows when to use power and when to show restraint. Similarly, a mature nation does not launch attacks because it can. It avoids war because it should. The Quran praises those who restrain their anger and forgive people. If an individual is praised for such traits, imagine the reward for a nation that does the same. If India continues on this path of restraint, it would not be a weakness. It would be a sign that it has grown beyond the beast of nationalism into the being of humanity. The transformation of India into a more human entity is not a political shift. It is a psychological and spiritual evolution. It is a shift from seeing enemies everywhere to seeing neighbors, from seeing domination as success to understanding that justice is the only foundation for peace. This is not just a theory, it is supported by both history and science. Every major civilization, whether Roman, Persian, or modern Western powers, grew through struggle, peaked with power, and only sustained their glory when they learned restraint. Those who did not learn, like Nazi Germany, were destroyed, not by enemies, but by their own unrestrained aggression. History is full of these lessons. The Quran merely reminds us of them more clearly and urgently. In this context, India's journey is a mirror for all nations. Today it may be India, tomorrow it could be any other state that needs to learn the same lesson. When power increases, humility must increase even more. When success grows, introspection must deepen. Otherwise, that success becomes a trap. The Quran warns that when people forget Allah during ease, He may test them during hardship. This is not cruelty, it is a mercy. Because through pain, humans return to truth, and through loss, they learn what is truly valuable. India has the potential to be a great nation, not just in technology or economy, but in morality and justice. But that potential will only be realized when it completes the transformation from instinct to intellect, from reaction to reflection, from pride to principle. This transformation cannot be bought, it must be earned through hard lessons, bitter truths, and painful realizations. And perhaps now, after touching the fire of consequence, India is finally beginning to feel the warmth of wisdom. This is what it means to become a human being, not by birth, but by behavior. The second keynote focuses on the Quran's concept of reflection and its emphasis on learning from history and consequences. The Quran repeatedly calls upon individuals and nations to observe, ponder, and reflect upon the events around them, not just to gain knowledge, but to develop wisdom and insight. This reflective process is seen as a distinguishing feature between human beings and animals. In Surah Al-Hashr 59, 18, 19, Allah commands, "O you who believe, fear Allah and let every soul look to what it has sent forth for tomorrow." This verse not only emphasizes personal accountability, but also the need for forward thinking, planning, and evaluating one's actions based on consequences. It is a call for self-assessment on both an individual and collective level. Furthermore, the Quran warns against heedlessness and blind following. It criticizes those who follow traditions or leaders without understanding or reflection. This is not just a religious caution, but a psychological principle. Societies that do not critically examine their history are doomed to repeat its mistakes. Surah Al-A'raf 7:17-9 provides a striking example. Allah says, "They have hearts with which they do not understand, eyes with which they do not see, and ears with which they do not hear. They are like cattle. No, they are even more astray." This verse draws a powerful analogy. When people fail to use their faculties of observation and reflection, they fall below even the level of animals. Why? Because animals act on instinct, while humans are endowed with reason, memory, and moral judgment. The Quran also presents stories of past nations like Ad, Thamud, Pharaoh, and Beni Israel, not merely as historical records, but as living lessons. These stories are introduced with phrases like, "Indeed, in that is a sign for those who reflect," or "Will they not ponder?" This recurring theme stresses the importance of critical thinking and learning from others' failures. The destruction of arrogant nations was not just a result of divine wrath. It was also a natural consequence of their injustice, pride, and failure to heed warnings. The Quran documents their downfall to teach the present and future generations about the outcomes of moral decay and collective arrogance. Science today emphasizes similar principles. Reflection, observation, hypothesis, and correction form the basis of the scientific method. Progress in science is not linear, but built on trial and error, data analysis, and understanding patterns from the past. The Quran, long before modern science developed these frameworks, encouraged this type of mental and societal evolution. A nation that reflects, adapts, and corrects itself can grow. A nation that refuses to do so stagnates or collapses. Thus, the Quran's call to reflection is not just spiritual, it is deeply intellectual and practical. It shapes not only how individuals live, but how civilizations survive. In the journey from arrogance to awareness, from impulse to intellect, and from aggression to accountability, both individuals and nations undergo trials that either break them or build them. India's recent shift from reckless posturing to cautious diplomacy is not just a political change, it is a spiritual and moral evolution. Like a human who learns after falling, India appears to be maturing through the consequences it has faced. And this transformation, painful yet powerful, is a reminder of what the Quran has taught for over 1400 years, that reflection, repentance, and reform are the signs of true humanity. Nations, like people, must look inward, correct their path, and strive not just for strength, but for justice. That is when they truly become human beings in the sight of truth. May Allah guide us all to seek wisdom in times of conflict, humility in times of power, and reflection in times of ease. May this message reach hearts that listen and minds that ponder. Thank you for your time, attention, and open-heartedness. May peace and blessings be upon you all, and may your journey towards truth be filled with light and success.